The tolling of the midnight bell reverberated through the cobblestone streets of Blackmere, a sound that marked both the changing of the guard and the commencement of another night of judgment. Moonlight filtered through a perpetual veil of fog that hung over the ancient town, casting eerie shadows upon the crumbling Gothic architecture and illuminating the faces of those who dared to venture out after dark. It was a face among these shadows that drew attention, a young woman with eyes the color of dawn breaking over troubled waters. Eleanora Thorne moved like a phantom through the narrow alleyways, her tattered cloak billowing behind her as she clutched a small cloth bag of herbs to her chest. Her breath formed delicate clouds in the crisp autumn air, each exhalation a silent prayer that she would return home unnoticed. Blackmere had not been kind to her kind, those who communed with plants, who understood the whispers of the wind, who could sense the subtle shifts in energy that most dismissed as mere superstition. Witch, they called her, though never to her face. The word followed her like a curse, etched into the minds of the townspeople who crossed themselves when she passed, who pulled their children close and averted their eyes. Eleanora was not a witch, at least not in the way they believed. She was a healer, a keeper of ancient knowledge passed down through generations of women who had lived on the fringes of society, their wisdom both sought after and feared. The town square loomed ahead, dominated by the imposing silhouette of the judgment cage, an iron monstrosity where those accused of heresy or witchcraft awaited their fate. Eleanora shuddered at the sight, quickening her pace. The cage had been empty for nearly a decade, not since old Widow Morrow had been locked away for speaking to her dead husband. The widow had died before her trial, her frail body unable to withstand the cold and humiliation. As Eleanora skirted the edge of the square, a flicker of movement caught her attention. A group of townsmen huddled near the entrance to the Thorn and Crown, the local tavern notorious for breeding contempt alongside its potent ales. Among them stood Magistrate Holloway, his corpulent figure unmistakable even in the dim light, and beside him the hawk-like profile of Reverend Fletcher, whose sermons of fire and brimstone had instilled fear in the hearts of Blackmere's residents for over 2 decades. Eleanora ducked into a shadowy doorway, pressing herself against the cold stone, straining to hear their conversation. "Seen her gathering nightshade by the light of the full moon," came Reverend Fletcher's nasal voice, dripping with accusation. "And Mrs. Pembroke's child fell ill the very next day. Coincidence? I think not. The girl's always been strange," another voice added. "Ever since her mother died. Keeps to herself, doesn't attend services. What more proof do you need?" Magistrate Holloway's deep grunt of agreement sent a chill down Eleanora's spine. "Very well. We'll bring her in for questioning tomorrow. If there's evidence of witchcraft—" "There will be," Reverend Fletcher assured him. "God reveals all sins in time." Fear gripped Eleanora's heart like a vice. They were speaking of her. There could be no doubt. The nightshade had been for a sleeping tincture for old Mr. Finch, whose arthritis kept him awake through the night. And little Tommy Pembroke had been ill, long before she'd gathered the herbs. In fact, it was his mother who had sought Eleanora's help when the physician's treatments had failed. She waited until the men retreated into the tavern before slipping from her hiding place, no longer concerned with reaching home undetected. She needed to flee Blackmere before dawn broke, before they came for her with their accusations and their righteous fury. Eleanora knew what happened to women like her. The cage awaited, and beyond that something worse. The cottage she called home stood on the outskirts of town, a humble dwelling nestled between ancient oaks whose branches seemed to cradle the thatched roof. Inside, dried herbs hung from the ceiling beams, filling the air with a fragrant bouquet of lavender, rosemary, and thyme. Books of botanical knowledge, passed down from her mother and grandmother before her, lined the shelves, alongside jars of salves and tinctures. Eleanora moved frantically, gathering only what she could carry, a change of clothes, her mother's silver pendant, a small knife, and as many of her herbal preparations as would fit in her travelling satchel. She would head for the forest, then make her way to the port city of Ravenmoor. Perhaps there, among the chaos and anonymity of a larger settlement, she could begin anew. As she reached for her warmest cloak, a sharp knock at the door froze her in place. It was too late. They had come for her sooner than expected. "Eleanora Thorne," Magistrate Holloway's voice boomed through the wooden door. "Open in the name of the law." Panic surged through her veins as she glanced desperately around the cottage, seeking escape. The back window, it was small, but perhaps she could squeeze through. She lunged for it, fingers fumbling with the latch, but the door behind her splintered open before she could pry the window free. Rough hands seized her arms, dragging her away from potential freedom. Reverend Fletcher's face loomed before her, his thin lips twisted in a triumphant smile. "Eleanora Thorne," he intoned, his voice carrying the weight of judgment, "you stand accused of practicing witchcraft and consorting with dark forces. You will be held until your trial, where you will answer for your crimes against God and the good people of Blackmere." "I've done nothing wrong," Eleanora protested, struggling against the iron grip of the men who held her. "I help people. I heal them when your prayers and potions fail." The Reverend's palm struck her cheek with enough force to snap her head to the side. "Blasphemy!" he hissed. "Add it to her charges." They dragged her through the town, past shuttered windows and doors that remained firmly closed despite the commotion. No one would stand for her. No one would risk association with an accused witch. Even those she had helped, those whose children she had nursed back to health or whose pain she had eased, would deny knowing her beyond necessary interactions. The judgment cage awaited in the center of the square, its iron bars gleaming dully in the moonlight. It was barely tall enough for her to stand upright and not wide enough to lie down, a punishment in itself before any formal sentence could be passed. "Perhaps a night in the cage will loosen your tongue," Magistrate Holloway said, his breath reeking of ale as he pushed her roughly inside. "Confess your sins, girl, and the court may show mercy." The lock clicked shut with finality, and Eleanora found herself alone in the square as her accusers retreated to the warmth of their homes. The night air bit at her skin through her thin dress, the chill seeping into her bones. She wrapped her arms around herself, sinking to her knees on the cold metal floor of the cage. Hours passed, marked only by the distant tolling of the church bell. 1 o'clock, 2, 3. The town slept, while Eleanora remained awake, her mind racing with thoughts of what awaited her. They would not give her a fair trial. Her fate had been sealed the moment suspicion had fallen upon her. The best she could hope for was banishment, if they were feeling merciful. If not, she shuddered, unable to complete the thought. As the bell tolled 4, a peculiar stillness descended upon the square. The fog thickened, swirling around the cage like spectral fingers, and even the usual night sounds, the hoot of owls, the scurrying of rats, fell silent. Eleanora lifted her head, sensing a shift in the air, a presence that made the hair on the back of her neck stand on end. From the mist emerged a figure, tall and elegant, moving with inhuman grace across the cobblestones. As he drew nearer, Eleanora could make out his features, sculpted as if from marble, with high cheekbones and eyes that gleamed like obsidian in the darkness. His attire spoke of wealth and status, a finely tailored coat of midnight blue, silver buttons catching what little light penetrated the fog, and a cravat of cream-colored silk at his throat. He stopped before the cage, regarding her with an expression of curiosity rather than the disgust or fear she had grown accustomed to seeing in the eyes of others. "Eleanora Thorne," he spoke, his voice a melodious whisper that seemed to caress her very soul. Healer, herbalist, accused witch. She pressed herself against the far side of the cage, as distant from him as the confines would allow. "Who are you?" she demanded, trying to mask her fear with defiance. "How do you know my name?" A smile played at the corners of his mouth, revealing the barest hint of unusually sharp canines. "I know many things about you, Eleanora. I know that you possess gifts that the simple minds of this town could never comprehend. I know that you are innocent of the charges laid against you, yet guilty of being something they cannot understand." He moved closer, his pale hand reaching out to grasp one of the iron bars. "My name is Lucien Dracul, Prince of the Nightlands beyond the Mist Mountains, and I have been watching you for quite some time." Eleonora's heart raced, her mind struggling to process his words. The Nightlands were the stuff of legend, a realm said to exist in parallel to their own, inhabited by creatures of darkness and magic. And the Dracul, they were spoken of only in hushed whispers, a dynasty of vampires who ruled those shadowed territories with blood-soaked hands. "If you've come to drink my blood, you might as well leave," she said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "They'll burn me at dawn, and then you'll have lost your chance." Lucienne laughed, a sound like velvet against her senses. "I have not come to harm you, brave one. Quite the opposite. I have come to offer you a choice." Before she could question him further, he grasped two of the iron bars in his hands. Muscles tensed beneath the fine fabric of his coat as he pulled, the veins in his neck standing out with the effort. The metal groaned in protest, then began to bend with an ear-splitting screech that surely would wake the town. Eleonora watched in astonishment as the bars parted, creating a space just wide enough for her to slip through. Lucien stepped back, extending a hand toward her. "Come," he said, his eyes boring into hers with hypnotic intensity. "Dawn approaches, and with it your executioners. I offer you sanctuary in the Nightlands, where your gifts will be honored rather than feared." She hesitated, her gaze darting between his outstretched hand and the twisted metal bars. Freedom beckoned, yet something told her that accepting his offer would irrevocably alter the course of her life. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would a vampire prince concern himself with the fate of a human woman?" Lucien's expression softened, revealing a vulnerability that seemed at odds with his otherworldly power. "Because you are not merely a human woman, Eleonora Thorne. You are the last descendant of a bloodline that once bridged the gap between our worlds. Your ancestors were revered as high priestesses in the Nightlands before fear drove them to seek refuge among mortals." Shouts erupted in the distance. The night watchman had heard the commotion. Soon, the entire town would be upon them. "Make your choice," Lucien urged, his hand still extended toward her. "Remain here to face their judgment, or come with me and discover the truth of who you really are." The shouting grew louder, accompanied by the flickering glow of approaching torches. Time had run out. With heart pounding against her ribs, Eleonora reached through the twisted bars and placed her hand in Lucien's. His skin was cool to the touch, yet a warmth spread up her arm at the contact, a sense of recognition that defied explanation. He pulled her gently from the cage, drawing her close as the fog swirled more densely around them. The world began to blur at the edges, the solid buildings of Blackmere dissolving into shadowy outlines. "Close your eyes," Lucien murmured against her ear, his arm encircling her waist. "The passage between realms can be disorienting for the uninitiated." As the angry voices of the townspeople converged upon the square, Eleonora surrendered to his embrace, closing her eyes against the dizzying shift in reality. The ground seemed to fall away beneath her feet, replaced by a sensation of weightlessness, of flying through darkness without constraints. When she opened her eyes again, Blackmere was gone. In its place stood an imposing castle of black stone, its spires reaching toward a sky where 3 moons hung like watchful eyes above a landscape both beautiful and terrible in its alienness. And somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled a mournful welcome to the realm where darkness reigned eternal, and where Eleonora Thorne would discover that the cage she had escaped was merely the beginning of a much greater imprisonment, or perhaps her ultimate liberation. The castle's great hall sprawled before Eleonora like something from a fever dream. Vaulted ceilings that disappeared into shadows, massive chandeliers crafted from what appeared to be bone and crystal, and tapestries depicting battles between creatures she had only encountered in forbidden texts. The air hummed with an energy that made her skin tingle, ancient magic woven into the very stones beneath her feet. "Welcome to Castle Dracul," Lucian said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "The seat of my family's power for 10 centuries?" Eleonora hugged herself, suddenly aware of her disheveled state. Her dress torn during the struggle with the magistrate's men, her hair wild, her cheeks still stinging from the reverend's slap. She felt small and utterly human amid such otherworldly grandeur. "This is impossible," she whispered, watching as figures moved in the periphery of her vision. Servants who seemed to glide rather than walk, their faces too perfect to be human. "The Nightlands are myths, stories to frighten children." Lucian's laugh was gentle, but tinged with something darker. "Myths often contain more truth than history, Eleonora. Your world and mine have always existed side by side, separated by nothing more substantial than fog and belief." He guided her through the hall toward a sweeping staircase of obsidian. "You must be exhausted. Dawn approaches in your realm, though here we exist in perpetual twilight. I'll show you to chambers where you can rest and refresh yourself." As they ascended the stairs, Eleonora's mind raced with questions, but exhaustion weighed on her like a physical burden. The events of the night, the accusation, the cage, the miraculous escape, had drained what little strength she possessed. The room Lucienne led her to was opulent beyond imagining. A 4-poster bed draped in midnight blue velvet, a fireplace large enough to stand in, and windows that opened onto a view of forests so dense they appeared black in the strange light of the 3 moons. "These will be your quarters," he said, opening an armoire to reveal dresses of fine silk and brocade. "You'll find everything you need. When you've rested, we have much to discuss about your heritage and why I brought you here." Before she could respond, he bowed slightly and retreated, leaving her alone in the alien luxury. The door closed with a soft click, and Eleonora waited, listening for the sound of a key turning in a lock, the telltale sign that she had merely exchanged one prison for another. But no such sound came. She crossed to the windows, placing her palm against the glass. It was cool to the touch and thrummed faintly, as though the barrier between inside and outside was more than mere glass. The forest beyond seemed to breathe, shifting in ways that defied the absence of wind. A movement caught her attention. A woman standing at the tree line, so pale she almost blended with the mist that clung to the forest floor. Her hair was silver, flowing down her back like liquid moonlight, and even from this distance, Eleonora could see that her eyes glowed with an unnatural amber light. The woman lifted a hand in what might have been greeting or warning, then melted back into the trees as if she had never existed at all. Unease prickled along Eleonora's spine. She turned from the window and approached the bed, running her fingers over the rich fabric of its coverings. Despite her exhaustion, she was reluctant to surrender to sleep in this strange place. Yet her body betrayed her. The softness of the mattress as she sat upon its edge was too inviting to resist. She lay down, intending only to rest for a moment while maintaining her vigilance. She dreamed of her mother, not as she had been in her final days, wasted and pale from the illness that had claimed her, but as she had been in Eleonora's childhood, vibrant, laughing, her hands stained green from the herbs she crushed between her fingers. "Listen to me, Ellie," Dream Mother said, her voice urgent despite her smile. "Not all is as it appears in the realm of shadows. The Dracul Court is a nest of vipers, each with their own venom. How do you know of this place?" Eleonora asked, reaching for her mother's hand. "Because I fled from it," came the reply, as her mother's features began to shift, her warm brown eyes bleeding into amber, her dark hair lightening to that impossible silver she had glimpsed in the forest. "As did your grandmother, and hers before her. We chose humanity over power, mortality over endless twilight." "Who are you?" Eleonora whispered as the woman before her completed her transformation into the stranger from the forest edge. "One who remembers what it is to be human," the silver-haired woman answered. "Seek me at the boundary stone when the third moon reaches its zenith. Come alone, Eleonora Thorne, if you wish to know the truth." Eleonora woke with a gasp, disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. The fire in the grate had burned down to embers, casting the room in a reddish glow that did little to dispel the shadows. How long had she slept? There was no way to tell in this place of eternal dusk. A soft knock at the door startled her fully awake. She rose quickly, smoothing her tattered dress as best she could. "Enter," she called, her voice steadier than she felt. The door opened to reveal not Lucian, but a young woman with skin the color of polished mahogany and eyes that shifted from deep blue to violet as she moved into the light. Like the servants Eleonora had glimpsed earlier, she moved with inhuman grace, though her features were warmer, less severe. "Lady Thorne," she said with a curtsy that seemed both formal and mocking, "I am Lilith, assigned to attend to your needs during your stay at Castle Dracul. Prince Lucien requests your presence at the evening feast once you are properly attired." Eleonora bristled at the implication that her current state was somehow improper, though she could hardly argue the point. "I'm not a lady," she said. "Just Eleonora will do." Lilith's smile revealed teeth too sharp to be entirely human. "In this realm, the blood in your veins grants you the title, whether you claim it or not. Now, shall we prepare you for the feast? It's not often we entertain a descendant of the old priestesses." Before Eleonora could question what that meant, Lilith had crossed to the armoire and begun selecting garments. Soon, Eleonora found herself submerged in a copper bathtub that had been brought by servants who materialized and disappeared with disconcerting efficiency. The water was scented with oils she didn't recognize, something like night-blooming jasmine, but with an undertone of spice that made her head swim pleasantly. As Lilith helped her wash her hair, Eleonora ventured a question. "The woman in the forest, silver-haired with amber eyes. Who is she?" Lilith's hands stilled momentarily. "You've seen Lady Ravenna. Interesting. She rarely reveals herself to newcomers." "Who is she?" Eleonora pressed. "The prince's aunt, sister to the late queen," Lilith replied, resuming her ministrations with slightly more force than necessary. "She was once the high priestess of the Night Court before she renounced her position and retreated to the forest. Some say she went mad with grief after her sister's death. Others whisper that she sees too clearly the currents of power that run beneath the court's splendor." She leaned closer, her breath cool against Eleonora's ear. "It would be wise not to mention her to the prince. There is tension between them." Once bathed and dried, Eleonora allowed Lilith to help her into the selected garments, a gown of deep emerald silk that clung to her body before flowing to the floor, its neckline lower than anything she would have dared wear in Blackmere. Around her shoulders went a cloak of black velvet, fastened with a silver brooch shaped like a crescent moon. Lilith stepped back to appraise her work, head tilted. Much better, though something is still missing. She reached into a pocket concealed in her own dress and withdrew a pendant on a silver chain, a blood-red stone set in a design of intertwined serpents. "The prince instructed me to give you this. It belonged to your ancestress, the last high priestess to serve in the Night Court before her line fled to the mortal realm." Eleonora hesitated before accepting the necklace. As it settled against her skin, a curious warmth spread through her chest, as though the stone recognized her. "It said that the stone changes color when danger approaches," Lilith said, watching Eleonora's reaction closely. "A useful trait in the Dracul court, where smiles hide fangs and compliments conceal daggers." "Why would I need such protection if I'm an honored guest?" Eleonora asked, her fingers tracing the serpentine pattern. Lilith's expression remained carefully neutral. "Even honored guests must navigate the treacherous waters of court politics. Now, shall we? The prince awaits, and he is not known for his patience." The great hall had been transformed in Eleonora's absence. Long tables arranged in a U-shape dominated the space, laden with silver platters and crystal goblets that caught the light from hundreds of candles. Figures in magnificent attire moved among the tables, some clearly vampiric with their unnatural pallor and predatory grace, others less easily categorized, but no less inhuman in their beauty. Conversation hushed as Eleonora entered on Lilith's heels. Dozens of pairs of eyes, some red, some gold, some the impossible blue of the deepest ocean, turned to assess her. She felt their judgment like a physical weight, pressing against her chest until she found it difficult to breathe. At the head table, Lucien rose from an ornate chair that could only be described as a throne. He was even more striking than she remembered, dressed now in formal attire of black and silver, a circlet of what appeared to be twisted obsidian resting on his brow. "Lady Eleonora Thorne," he announced, his voice carrying effortlessly through the hall. "Descendant of High Priestess Morgana, returned to us after 10 generations of absence. The Night Court welcomes you." A murmur rippled through the assembled courtiers, surprise, speculation, and something that raised the hair on Eleonora's arms. Fear. Lucien extended a hand, beckoning her forward. Lilith gave her a gentle push, and Eleonora found herself walking the length of the hall alone, intensely aware of every eye upon her, every whispered comment. She held her head high, channeling the defiance that had sustained her through years of suspicion and isolation in Blackmere. These creatures might be powerful beyond mortal comprehension, but she would not cower before them. She reached the dais where Lucien stood and dropped into what she hoped was an acceptable curtsy. His hand caught hers before she could rise, drawing her up and to the empty seat at his right, a position of honor that prompted another wave of whispers among the courtiers. "You look magnificent," he said softly, for her ears alone. "The blood of the old ones runs true in you." Before she could question him, he turned to address the gathering. "Tonight, we celebrate not only the return of the priestess bloodline to our court, but also the culmination of a plan set in motion centuries ago. For too long, the veil between our realms has grown thin only at random intervals, limiting our ability to move between worlds. With Lady Eleonora's assistance, we shall establish a permanent gateway, allowing free passage for the first time since the Great Sundering." Applause erupted, though Eleonora noted that not all faces showed equal enthusiasm. In particular, a slender vampire with hair like spun gold and eyes the color of glacial ice watched her with barely concealed hostility from his position several seats down the table. "You speak as though I've agreed to this plan," Eleonora said quietly, as Lucien took his seat beside her. "I know nothing of gateways or sundering. I came here to escape execution, not to become entangled in your politics." Lucien's smile didn't falter, but something cold flickered in the depths of his eyes. "All will be explained in due time. For now, eat, drink, enjoy the hospitality of my court." Servants appeared, laying plates before them, roasted meats, fruits she didn't recognize, and pastries too delicate to have been crafted by human hands. Eleonora noted that while similar food was served to the other guests, many also sipped from goblets filled with liquid too thick and dark to be wine. She suppressed a shudder. The vampire who had been watching her leaned forward, addressing her directly across the table. "So this is the mortal who will supposedly break the barrier between realms? She looks rather ordinary." "Lord Valerian," Lucien said, a warning in his tone. "Lady Eleonora is our guest." "Of course, Your Highness." Valerian inclined his head, though his eyes remained fixed on Eleonora. "I meant no offense. I merely wonder if one of mixed blood can truly command the power necessary for such an undertaking. The last attempt cost us dearly. As you well know." Eleonora sensed the tension beneath the seemingly innocuous exchange. "What exactly is it you believe I can do?" she asked, addressing Lucien but keeping her gaze on Valerian. "I'm a healer, nothing more." "You are far more than that," Lucien replied. "The women of your line possess a unique ability. They can manipulate the barriers between worlds. Your great-grandmother, 10 times removed, was the last to serve as High Priestess here. She maintained the balance, ensuring controlled passages between realms. When she fled to the mortal world, that balance was disrupted. And why did she flee? Eleonora pressed, remembering her dream and the strange woman in the forest. A charged silence fell over the nearby courtiers. Lucien's expression hardened almost imperceptibly before smoothing into diplomatic neutrality. Politics of a bygone era. Nothing that concerns us now. It concerns me if you expect me to take up a position my ancestress abandoned, Eleonora countered, surprised by her own boldness. I want to understand what I'm being asked to do, and what consequences it might have. Lord Valerian laughed, a sound like ice cracking. She has spirit, your mortal priestess. Perhaps she is of the bloodline after all. Lady Eleonora will be fully informed of her duties and their importance, Lucien said, his tone closing the subject, after she has had time to acclimate to our realm and understand the honor being bestowed upon her. The conversation shifted to court matters Eleonora could scarcely follow. Disputes between noble houses, hunts in the mortal realm, alliances with creatures called the Fae that seemed to both fascinate and repel the vampiric courtiers. She ate sparingly, hyper-aware of the pendant against her skin, which had grown noticeably warmer throughout the meal. As servants cleared away the remnants of the feast, musicians appeared, striking up an ethereal melody on instruments that resembled no harp or violin Eleonora had ever seen. The tables were moved aside, creating space for dancing in the center of the hall. "Will you honor me with a dance?" Lucien asked, rising and extending his hand to her. "I don't know your dances," Eleonora demurred. "Your body will remember, even if your mind does not," he insisted. "The knowledge of the old ones is carried in your blood." Reluctantly, she placed her hand in his. As he led her to the center of the floor, the other dancers cleared a space, forming a circle around them. Lucienne placed one hand at her waist, the other keeping hold of her fingers, and then they were moving. To her astonishment, Eleonora found her feet following steps she had never learned, her body swaying and turning in perfect harmony with Lucienne's, as though they had danced together 1,000 times before. The music seemed to flow through her, guiding her movements with a will of its own. "You see?" Lucien murmured, drawing her closer than propriety would allow in her world. "Your blood remembers." As they spun, Eleonora caught glimpses of the watching courtiers, some admiring, others calculating, a few openly hostile. Among them, a flash of silver hair near one of the great hall's side entrances caught her attention. The woman from her dream, Lady Ravenna, stood half-concealed by a column, her amber eyes fixed on Eleonora with an intensity that transcended the physical distance between them. "The third moon reaches its zenith," Ravenna's voice whispered directly into Eleonora's mind, though the woman's lips never moved. "The boundary stone awaits." The shock of the mental intrusion caused Eleonora to miss a step, stumbling against Lucien's chest. He steadied her with inhuman reflexes, concern flashing across his features. "Are you unwell?" he asked. "Just dizzy," she lied, glancing back toward where Ravenna had stood, but the space was empty now. "The wine, perhaps, or the strangeness of everything." Lucien nodded, seemingly satisfied with her explanation. "Perhaps it is time you retired for the evening. The transition between realms can be taxing for mortals, even those with your lineage." He escorted her from the dance floor, signaling to Lilith, who materialized from the crowd with remarkable promptness. "Ensure Lady Eleonora returns safely to her chambers," Lucien instructed. "She requires rest." "Of course, Your Highness," Lilith replied with a curtsy. As Eleonora followed Lilith from the great hall, she felt Lucien's gaze on her back like a physical weight. Something about his explanation of her heritage and purpose here rang false, or at least incomplete. The pendant against her skin had grown almost uncomfortably hot, and she remembered Lilith's words. "It changes color when danger approaches." In her chambers, Lilith helped her out of the formal gown and into a nightdress of soft silver silk. "Is there anything else you require, Lady Thorne?" she asked, turning down the bed linens. "Information," Eleonora replied, sitting at the dressing table and removing the pendant, which had cooled somewhat since leaving the feast. "What really happened to my ancestress? Why did she flee the night court?" Lilith's expression shuttered. "Such matters are not for servants to discuss." "Please," Eleonora pressed. "I'm being asked to take up a position I don't understand, in a realm I never knew existed. At least give me something to help make sense of it all." The maidservant hesitated, glancing toward the door, as if to ensure it was firmly closed. "It is said," she began in a hushed tone, "that High Priestess Morgana discovered a terrible truth about the nature of the gateways she maintained. That they were being used not just for passage between realms, but for something darker. When she confronted the then king with her suspicions, she was marked for execution. She fled with her infant daughter to the mortal realm, using her powers to seal the passages behind her." "What darker purpose?" Eleonora asked, leaning forward. "That I do not know," Lilith replied, "or perhaps I do not dare speak it aloud, even here. But I will say this, watch the prince carefully when he speaks of reuniting the realms. There is hunger in his eyes that goes beyond the usual thirst of his kind." With that cryptic warning, Lilith bowed and retreated from the room, leaving Eleonora alone with her thoughts and the weight of expectations she neither understood nor had agreed to bear. She moved to the window, gazing out at the alien landscape. The forest loomed, dark and impenetrable, but beyond it, a clearing was visible in the silver light of the moons. In its center stood a massive stone monolith, the boundary stone from her dream, she was certain. The third and smallest of the moons had nearly reached its highest point in the strange sky. Eleonora clutched the pendant, feeling its warmth pulsing like a second heartbeat against her palm. Every instinct told her that seeking out Ravenna was dangerous, possibly a trap, certainly against Lucien's wishes. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that the answer she sought lay not in the opulent halls of Castle Dracul, but in the wild places beyond, with a woman who had once walked the path now being laid before Eleonora's feet. Decision made, she slipped the pendant back around her neck and reached for the black velvet cloak. If she was to understand her place in this twilight realm and the true nature of Lucien's plans, she would need to hear all sides of the story. The boundary stone awaited, and with it, perhaps, the truth that her ancestress had risked everything to protect. The corridors of Castle Dracul lay in shadow, illuminated only by occasional sconces whose flames burned with an unnatural blue tint. Eleonora moved silently, guided by instinct rather than knowledge of the castle's layout. The velvet cloak draped around her shoulders seemed to absorb what little light existed, rendering her nearly invisible as she slipped from alcove to alcove, avoiding the occasional servant or courtier who drifted through the halls. Her heart pounded against her ribs, the pendant at her throat pulsing in rhythm with her fear. This was madness, sneaking out to meet a woman she'd only glimpsed, based on a dream that might have been nothing more than the product of an exhausted mind in an alien realm. Yet something deep within her, perhaps the same ancestral memory that had guided her feet in the dance, urged her forward. A sound, soft footfalls, and whispered conversation sent her pressing back against a wall, behind a suit of armor crafted from metal that seemed to drink in light rather than reflect it. Two figures passed by her hiding place. Lord Valerian and a vampire woman Eleonora had noticed at the feast, her skin so pale it was almost translucent. "Fool's errand," Valerian was saying, his voice low but clear in the silent corridor. "The girl cannot possibly channel enough power to sustain a permanent gateway. The Dracul bloodline grows weaker with each passing generation, and Lucien grows desperate." "Yet he seemed confident," the woman replied. "Perhaps there is something about this mortal he hasn't revealed to the court. Or perhaps he deludes himself. Either way, we must be prepared. If the ritual fails as the last one did. They turned a corner, their voices fading before Eleonora could hear the rest. She waited several heartbeats before continuing, their words echoing in her mind. Ritual. What exactly was Lucien planning to use her for? Finding her way out of the castle proved easier than expected. Perhaps it was luck, or perhaps some deeper intuition guided her to a servant's entrance left unguarded. The night air, if it could be called night in this place of eternal twilight, enveloped her as she stepped outside, carrying scents both familiar and alien. Night-blooming flowers mingled with a metallic tang that reminded her of blood. The forest loomed before her, a wall of twisted trees whose trunks seemed to writhe when viewed from the corner of the eye. Eleonora hesitated at its edge, suddenly aware of how vulnerable she was, a human woman alone in a realm of monsters, with only a borrowed cloak and a pendant of dubious protection. "You came." A voice like silk over steel observed from the shadows. "I wondered if you would heed the call." Lady Ravenna stepped from between two towering trees, her silver hair gleaming in the multi-mooned light. She wore a simple gown of midnight blue, unadorned save for a belt of silver links from which hung various pouches and a curved dagger. Her amber eyes regarded Eleonora with an intensity that felt like a physical touch. "You called me here," Eleonora replied, lifting her chin. "In my dream." Ravenna's mouth curved in what might have been a smile. "Dreams are the easiest way to reach those with the old blood. Your mind was open, receptive. It made finding you simple." "Why did you want to find me?" "To warn you," Ravenna said, moving closer with that same inhuman grace that all the inhabitants of this realm seemed to possess. "And to offer you a choice. A real one, not the false options my nephew will present." "Lucien is your nephew?" Eleonora asked, though she'd already learned as much from Lilith. "By blood, yes. By philosophy." Ravenna's expression hardened. "We have been at odds for centuries. Walk with me to the boundary stone. It is not safe to linger so close to the castle." Eleonora hesitated only briefly before falling into step beside the silver-haired woman. The forest path was narrow, forcing them to walk single file in places, with Ravenna leading the way. Strange lights flickered between the trees, not fireflies, but something that moved with deliberate purpose, occasionally swooping close enough that Eleonora could see they were tiny humanoid figures with dragonfly wings and needle-sharp teeth. "Whisper sprites," Ravenna explained without turning, "harmless unless you're keeping secrets. They feed on hidden truths." "I have no secrets here," Eleonora said, "only questions." "Everyone has secrets, child, even those who believe themselves transparent." Ravenna pushed aside a curtain of hanging vines, revealing a clearing bathed in silver light. "We have arrived." The boundary stone stood at the center of the clearing, a monolith of obsidian at least 15 feet tall, covered in spiraling runes that seemed to shift and change when not directly observed. The air around it hummed with power, raising the fine hairs on Eleonora's arms and making the pendant at her throat vibrate. "What is this place?" she asked, her voice hushed by instinctive reverence. "One of the original gateways between realms," Ravenna replied, approaching the stone with careful steps. "Created long before vampires ruled the Nightlands, when the barriers between worlds were maintained by the high priestesses, your ancestresses." She placed her palm against the stone, and the runes flared with golden light. For millennia, the priestesses kept balance. They allowed controlled passage, enough to prevent the barriers from weakening, but not so much that either realm could be invaded or corrupted by the other. They drew their power from both worlds, existing in the liminal space between. Eleonora moved closer, drawn by the pulsing light of the runes. Without conscious decision, she raised her own hand toward the stone. Ravenna caught her wrist, stopping her. "Not yet," she cautioned. "The stone will recognize your blood. It will respond to you in ways it does not for others. Before you touch it, you must understand what Lucien intends." He said something about establishing a permanent gateway, Eleonora recalled. At the feast, he spoke as though I had already agreed to help him. Ravenna's expression darkened. A permanent gateway would destroy the balance the priestesses died to protect. It would allow unrestricted movement between realms, and more importantly for Lucien and his court, unrestricted access to human blood. But vampires already hunt in the human world, Eleonora said, remembering stories from her own realm. The disappearances, the bodies found drained. Those are the result of temporary breaches, moments when the veil thins enough to allow passage. Such opportunities are rare and brief. A permanent gateway would change everything. Ravenna's grip on Eleonora's wrist tightened. Your realm would become nothing more than a feeding ground. Your people, livestock. Horror washed over Eleonora as the implications sank in. And Lucien needs me for this. Why? If he's so powerful, only one with the blood of the priestesses can manipulate the barriers between worlds. Lucien can tear temporary holes, can slip through when the veil naturally thins, but he cannot create or maintain a stable passage. For that, he needs you. So he saved me from execution only to use me as a tool, Eleonora said bitterly. Yes and no. Ravenna released her wrist, stepping back. He has been searching for a descendant of Morgana for centuries. When he found you, a direct bloodline heir already marked as a witch in your realm, it must have seemed like fate. Eleonora's mind raced. The accusations against me in Blackmere, they weren't coincidence, were they? Lucien arranged for me to be condemned, so he could appear as my savior. It would not be beyond him, Ravenna acknowledged. My nephew has patience when it suits his purposes. He may have been watching you for years, waiting for the perfect moment to intervene. Anger flared in Eleonora's chest, hot and clarifying. I won't help him. I won't be used to enslave my own world. It may not be that simple, Ravenna cautioned. Lucien will not accept refusal. He has waited too long, invested too much, and there are other ways to secure your cooperation. The implication hung in the air between them. Compulsion, mind control, blood bonds, all the powers that folklore attributed to vampires, powers that Eleonora now understood, were very real. What can I do? She asked, her voice steadier than she felt. I can't return to my world without his help, and even if I could, I'd still be facing execution. There is another option. Ravenna withdrew a small vial from one of the pouches at her belt, a crystal container filled with liquid that shimmered like quicksilver. This is essence of moonstone, mixed with my own blood. If you drink it, it will temporarily amplify your natural abilities. You would be able to open a gateway yourself, not a permanent one, but enough to escape. Eleonora eyed the vial suspiciously. Why would you help me? What do you gain? A chance to thwart my nephew's plans, Ravenna admitted readily, and perhaps atonement for my own role in this long game. I was there, you see, when your ancestress fled. I helped her escape, and in doing so, I condemned her descendants to centuries of hiding, of being hunted. She held the vial out, its contents catching the light of the 3 moons overhead. I offer you the same choice I offered Morgana. Flee and protect your world, or stay and risk becoming the instrument of its destruction. Eleonora stared at the vial, indecision warring within her. To drink a vampire's blood, even diluted, seemed both dangerous and irreversible. Yet what choice did she have? Before she could decide, a cold voice cut through the clearing. How predictable you've become, Aunt. Lucien stepped from the forest's edge, his elegant attire replaced by what appeared to be battle leathers, his face hard with fury. Behind him stood Lord Valerian and several other vampires Eleonora recognized from the feast, all armed with weapons that gleamed with an unnatural light. You never could resist interfering in matters beyond your concern, Lucien continued, moving forward with predatory grace. First with Morgana, now with her descendant. One might almost suspect you of sabotage. It's not sabotage to prevent catastrophe. Ravenna replied, stepping slightly in front of Eleonora. A permanent gateway would destabilize both realms. You know this, Lucian. Your father knew it too, which is why he never attempted what you now propose. My father was weak, Lucian spat, content to subsist on the meager feeding opportunities provided by temporary breaches. I have greater vision. His gaze shifted to Eleonora, softening marginally. I had hoped to explain everything to you properly, to help you understand the honor being offered. You would not merely be opening a gateway, you would be ruling alongside me, elevated to a position of power beyond anything you could achieve in your mortal realm. As what? Eleonora demanded. Your puppet? Your blood source? Or just the key you need to unlock the door to endless slaughter? Something dangerous flashed in Lucian's eyes. You've been thoroughly poisoned against me, I see. A pity. I had hoped for cooperation rather than coercion, but I am not above using other methods. He signaled to his companions, who began to spread out around the clearing, cutting off any possible escape routes. Ravenna moved fully in front of Eleonora, the dagger from her belt now in her hand. She is under my protection, Ravenna declared. By the ancient laws of sanctuary, I claim the right to champion her choice. Lucian laughed, the sound devoid of humor. Ancient laws? You invoke traditions, while standing against the very order those traditions were meant to protect. Your hypocrisy is remarkable. He drew a sword from a scabbard at his hip, a blade of what appeared to be black glass, edged with silver that caught the moonlight. Stand aside, Aunt. This need not end in bloodshed. It always ends in bloodshed with you, nephew, Ravenna replied, her amber eyes beginning to glow with inner fire. That is precisely the problem. What happened next occurred so quickly that Eleonora's human eyes could barely follow. Ravenna lunged forward, her dagger leaving a trail of silver light in its wake. Lucien met her with his sword, the clash of weapons sending sparks of cold fire into the night air. Around them, the other vampires closed in, their movements a blur of inhuman speed. Eleonora backed toward the boundary stone, clutching the pendant at her throat as if it might somehow protect her from the chaos unfolding around her. The stone hummed against her back, the runes flaring brighter as she came into contact with them. In the midst of the battle, Ravenna's eyes found hers. "Now, Eleonora!" she shouted above the din. "Touch the stone!" Your blood remembers the way. The vial of moonstone essence arced through the air, thrown with unerring accuracy, despite Ravenna's ongoing battle with Lucian. Eleonora caught it reflexively, the cool crystal warming instantly in her palm. Lucian's head snapped toward her, his face contorted with fury and something like fear. "Don't!" he commanded, disengaging from Ravenna and starting toward Eleonora with terrifying speed. Time seemed to slow. The vial in her hand, the stone at her back, the pendant hot against her skin. Choices and consequences spiraled out before her, returning to a world that had rejected her or remaining in one that sought to use her. Freedom or power, humanity or something beyond it. Without further hesitation, Eleonora uncorked the vial and swallowed its contents in one gulp. The liquid burned down her throat like liquid fire, spreading through her veins with painful intensity. She cried out, pressing both hands against the boundary stone behind her as she fought to remain standing. The runes flared blindingly bright, responding to her touch and to the power now coursing through her blood. Images flooded her mind, memories not her own but her ancestress's, knowledge passed down through generations, the pattern of the gateways, the flow of energy between realms, the words of power, ancient and potent. "No!" Lucian roared, lunging toward her. Ravenna intercepted him. Her dagger finding its mark in his shoulder, he howled in pain but didn't slow, throwing his aunt aside with inhuman strength. Eleonora began to chant, the words rising unbidden from some deep ancestral memory, her hands tracing patterns over the runes of the boundary stone. The air around her began to shimmer, reality itself seeming to thin and tear like fabric. Behind the stone, a doorway began to form, not to her world, she realized with sudden clarity, but to somewhere else entirely. A third realm, neither human nor vampire, glimpsed only in the oldest stories her mother had told her, the Wild Lands. The place where the first priestesses had come from, before they took up the mantle of guardians between worlds. Lord Valerian appeared at Lucian's side, his glacial eyes wide with shock. "She's not opening a passage to the mortal realm," he said. "This is something else entirely." "Stop her!" Lucian commanded, clutching his wounded shoulder as he staggered forward. But it was too late. The gateway stabilized, a shimmering portal of opalescent light that pulsed in rhythm with Eleonora's heartbeat. Through it, she could see verdant forests and crystal spires rising against a dawn-pink sky, a realm of beauty beyond imagining. Figures appeared on the other side of the portal, tall, ethereal beings with features that blended human and animal aspects, crowned with antlers or adorned with feathers, their eyes ancient and knowing. "The firstborn," Ravenna breathed, rising from where Lucian had thrown her. "They have answered the call." One of the beings stepped forward to the edge of the portal, its gaze fixed on Eleonora. When it spoke, its voice resonated not in the air, but directly in her mind. "Daughter of Morgana," it said, "you have reopened the way after 10 centuries of silence. The balance has been disturbed too long. It is time for the truth to be known." The being extended a hand, long-fingered and marked with swirling patterns that matched the runes on the boundary stone. An invitation, a choice. Eleonora glanced back at Ravenna, who nodded almost imperceptibly, then at Lucian, whose expression had transformed from rage to calculation, his eyes fixed on the portal with naked hunger. "The Wild Lands," he murmured. "So they do still exist. More powerful than even the mortal realm, more blood, more magic." His words confirmed everything Ravenna had warned her about. Whatever realm was open to him, Lucian would seek to exploit it, to drain it of life and power. The being on the other side of the portal spoke again, this time addressing all present. "The time of choosing has come. The priestess bloodline must decide the fate of all 3 realms." "Choose me," Lucian urged, stepping closer to Eleonora, his voice dropping to the hypnotic purr that had first captivated her in Blackmere. "Together, we could rule across all worlds. Your power, my vision. There would be no limit to what we could achieve." "He lies," Ravenna countered. "He seeks only domination, not partnership." The firstborn being remained still, hand outstretched, waiting. Eleonora stood at the threshold between worlds, the blood of her ancestress singing in her veins, power unlike anything she had ever known coursing through her. In that moment she understood that whatever choice she made would reshape not just her own destiny, but the future of 3 realms. "I choose," she began, but the words died in her throat as Lucian lunged forward in a final, desperate attempt to seize control of the gateway. His hands closed around her throat, the pendant between them flaring with crimson light. "You will open the way for me," he growled, his fangs fully extended, eyes blazing with inhuman hunger. One way or another. The world seemed to hold its breath as Eleonora stood suspended between life and death, between realms, between choices that would echo through time itself. And in that suspended moment, the true nature of her power and the terrible price it demanded finally revealed itself. The crimson light of the pendant blazed between them, a searing heat that caused Lucian to recoil, his hands releasing her throat as though burned by sacred fire. Eleonora gasped, drawing in a ragged breath as the power within her surged, in response to the threat, ancestral magic awakening fully in her blood. "You cannot force what must be freely given," she said, her voice resonating with newfound authority. That was the first law of the priestesses, and it remains true even now. The boundary stone behind her pulsed in sympathetic rhythm with her heartbeat. the gateway to the wildlands, shimmering with increasingly unstable energy. The firstborn, being on the other side, withdrew its hand. Its ancient eyes filled with something like sorrow as it watched the conflict unfold. "The gateway cannot remain open indefinitely without a choice," Ravenna called out, her silver hair whipping around her face as the energy from the portal created an otherworldly wind. "It will collapse, and the resulting backlash could destroy all three realms." Lucian's expression contorted with fury and desperation. "Don't you understand what's at stake? Our kind has been slowly dying for centuries, trapped in this twilight realm with diminishing resources. The mortal world alone cannot sustain us. We need the magic of the wildlands." "At what cost?" Eleonora demanded, standing her ground as the power within her continued to build. "The enslavement of two realms to feed your hunger. The destruction of the balance my ancestors died to protect." A sound like thunder rolled through the clearing as cracks began to appear in the boundary stone, golden light spilling through the fissures. The firstborn being spoke again, its voice resonating in all their minds. "The threefold balance must be restored, or all shall perish. Priestess, you stand at the nexus of worlds. Only you can remake what was broken." In that moment of clarity, Eleonora understood what she must do. The knowledge unfurled within her mind, like a flower opening to the sun. The true purpose of the priestess bloodline, the secret Morgana had died to protect, the reason the gateways had been sealed. "It was never about keeping the realms separated," she said, turning to face Lucian and Ravenna. "It was about ensuring that no single realm could dominate the others. The priestesses weren't gatekeepers, they were guardians of balance." She placed both hands against the cracking boundary stone, feeling the ancient power respond to her touch. "The permanent gateway you seek already exists, Lucian. It has always existed. But it requires sacrifice to maintain, a willing sacrifice that your ancestors refused to make." Understanding dawned in Ravenna's amber eyes. "The blood tithe," she whispered. "The royal house of Dracul was meant to give of their own blood to sustain the balance, not take the blood of others. A perversion of our birthright," Lucian snarled, though doubt had begun to creep into his expression. "Why should we sacrifice when we have the power to take?" "Because that choice is what destroyed the balance in the first place," Eleonora replied, her voice steady despite the chaos swirling around them. "Your ancestors rejected their duty as guardians and became conquerors instead. They turned on the priestesses, who reminded them of their obligation, forcing Morgana to flee with the knowledge of how to properly maintain the gateways. The boundary stone's cracks widened, the structure now held together only by the force of Eleonora's will and the ancient magic running through her veins. The portal to the wildlands flickered ominously, the firstborn being watching with ancient patience as the drama of history repeated itself. Eleonora turned to Lucian, her eyes glowing with the same amber light as Ravenna's. "I offer you the same choice that was offered to your ancestors. Become a true guardian of the balance, give of yourself to sustain it, or watch all three realms collapse into chaos." Lord Valerian stepped forward, his glacial eyes fixed on Lucian. "The bloodline weakens with each generation, because we turned away from our true purpose," he said, his voice carrying the weight of revelation. "I have seen the ancient texts, the histories your father sought to suppress. This woman speaks truth, my prince." Lucian stared at his loyal courtier, betrayal etched across his features. "You too, Valerian, after centuries of service?" "Because of centuries of service," Valerian corrected. "I have watched our realm slowly dying, our people growing weaker with each passing generation. If there is another way, a true way, should we not embrace it?" The boundary stone gave a deafening crack, a fissure running from its base to its apex. The gateway flickered violently, the vision of the wildlands beginning to dissolve. "Decide now," Ravenna urged, moving to Eleonora's side. "There is no more time." Lucian looked from the failing gateway to Eleonora, conflict evident in every line of his body. Centuries of ambition warred against the undeniable truth before him. Finally, he stepped forward, drawing a dagger from his belt. "What must I do?" he asked, his voice stripped of its usual arrogance. "Give freely what you would have taken by force," Eleonora replied. "Your blood, offered willingly to sustain the balance between worlds." Without further hesitation, Lucian drew the blade across his palm, crimson blood welling from the cut. "I, Lucian Dracul, last of the royal bloodline, offer my blood to maintain the covenant between realms." He pressed his bleeding hand against the boundary stone beside Eleonora's. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The stone's cracks sealed themselves, the runes flaring with renewed brilliance. The gateway stabilized, the vision of the wild lands becoming clear once more, the firstborn being nodded in solemn approval. "The covenant is renewed," it intoned. "Blood freely given sustains the balance. The priestess may now make her final choice." Eleonora felt the power within her shift, no longer wild and unstable, but focused and purposeful. She understood now what was being asked of her, and the price it would demand. "If I choose to reopen the pathways between worlds," she said, looking to Ravenna for confirmation, "I must remain as their guardian, like my ancestress before me." "Yes," Ravenna replied softly. "The priestess cannot belong fully to any single realm. You would exist in the spaces between, maintaining the balance, ensuring that the covenant is honored." "A lifetime of service," Eleonora murmured. "Never truly belonging anywhere." "But with the power to walk between all worlds," Lucian added, his eyes meeting hers with newfound respect. "Neither prisoner nor exile, but ambassador to 3 realms." The firstborn being extended its hand once more. "Choose, daughter of Morgana. The moment of decision cannot be delayed further." Eleonora took a deep breath, thinking of Blackmere with its suspicion and fear, of the judgment cage from which she had been freed. She thought of the Night Court, with its dangerous beauty and ancient powers, of Lucian's initial deception and his eventual capitulation, and she thought of the glimpsed wonders of the Wildlands, a realm she knew only through ancestral memory. "I choose balance," she declared, her voice ringing with certainty. "I will take up the mantle of High Priestess and Guardian of the Gateways. I will walk between worlds, as my ancestress did, ensuring that the covenant is maintained and that no realm dominates another." She placed her free hand into that of the firstborn being, feeling an electric current of ancient power flow through the connection. The boundary stone thrummed beneath her other palm, responding to her decision. "So be it," the being said. "The trinity of realms is restored." Light exploded from the boundary stone, enveloping Eleonora in a cocoon of golden radiance. She felt her body changing, mortal limitations falling away as the power of the priestess bloodline fully awakened within her. When the light faded, she stood transformed, her eyes now permanently the color of amber, her once dark hair threaded through with strands of silver, her skin bearing the faintest luminescence like moonlight trapped beneath frost. Lucian stared at her with undisguised awe. "You are magnificent," he breathed, his bleeding hand still pressed against the stone. "She is as she was meant to be," Ravenna corrected, bowing her head in acknowledgement of Eleonora's new status. The first true High Priestess since Morgana fled. The gateway to the Wildlands stabilized completely, and beside it, 2 new portals began to form, one showing the familiar cobblestone streets of Blackmere, the other opening onto the grand hall of Castle Dracul. 3 worlds connected once more, Eleonora said, stepping back from the boundary stone, which now glowed with a steady, healthy light. The balance restored. The firstborn being nodded in approval. "You have chosen wisely, High Priestess. But remember that balance is not static. It must be constantly maintained, constantly renewed. The blood covenant must be honored by all 3 realms." "It will be," Lucian declared, straightening to his full height. "I give you my word as Prince of the Nightlands. My blood and that of my descendants will sustain the covenant for as long as our line endures." "And what of your ambitions?" Eleonora asked him directly. "Your dreams of conquest?" A shadow of his former arrogance crossed his features, quickly replaced by something more measured. Redirected, perhaps. "There are better ways to strengthen our realm than through domination of others. Cooperation, trade, cultural exchange." His lips curved in a smile that was equal parts rueful and genuine. "I am old, Eleonora, but not too old to learn new ways." Ravenna approached her nephew, placing a hand on his shoulder. "The vision you once mocked me for, peaceful coexistence between realms, may now be possible. Will you work toward it with me?" After a moment's hesitation, Lucien covered her hand with his own. "For the good of our people, yes." The firstborn being stepped fully through the gateway, its otherworldly presence causing the air around it to shimmer. Up close, Eleonora could see that its antlers were actually intricate branches of living crystal, and its eyes held galaxies of ancient wisdom. "High Priestess Eleonora," it said, its voice now audible to all present, "you must complete the ritual by establishing your seat of power, a place from which you can monitor and maintain the balance between worlds." "The temple at the heart of the forest," Ravenna suggested. "It has stood empty since Morgana's time, but it was built for this very purpose." Eleonora nodded, feeling the rightness of the suggestion resonate within her transformed being. "I will need representatives from each realm to assist me, trusted individuals who understand the importance of balance. I offer myself as ambassador of the Night Court." Lilith's voice came unexpectedly from the edge of the clearing. She stepped forward, dropping to one knee before Eleonora. "If you will have me, High Priestess." Eleonora smiled, recognizing the genuine loyalty beneath Lilith's carefully composed exterior. "Rise, Lilith. I accept your service with gratitude. From the wild lands you shall have Thorn, my son," the firstborn being said, gesturing toward the gateway where another figure now stood. A being similar to its parent but younger, with curious eyes that held both wisdom and mischief. He has long studied the mortal realm and the Nightlands. His knowledge will serve you well. "And from Blackmere?" Eleonora asked, glancing toward the portal that showed her former home. "That choice must be yours," Ravenna said gently, "but choose carefully. Few mortals have the strength of spirit to dwell between realms without losing themselves." Eleonora's thoughts turned to the people of Blackmere, to those who had feared and reviled her, but also to those she had helped, those who had sought her healing despite the risks. One face rose clearly in her mind, a young woman named Meredith, the blacksmith's daughter, who had defended Eleonora publicly more than once, and who possessed a keen intelligence and open mind rare in their provincial town. "I know who to ask," she said with certainty, "but first there is something I must do." With newfound confidence, Eleonora approached the portal to Blackmere. Through it, she could see that dawn was breaking over the town square, revealing the empty judgment cage where she had been imprisoned just hours before. Or was it days? Time moved differently between the realms. A crowd had gathered, led by Magistrate Holloway and Reverend Fletcher. They were examining the twisted bars of the cage, their faces contorted with rage and fear. The Reverend was already whipping the townspeople into a frenzy, declaring that dark forces had spirited away the witch to prevent God's justice from being served. Eleonora stepped through the portal, emerging in the town square with a shimmer of otherworldly light. Gasps and screams erupted from the gathered crowd as they beheld her transformed appearance. Reverend Fletcher raised his crucifix before him like a shield. "Demon!" he shrieked. "See how she reveals her true nature." Eleonora regarded him calmly, feeling none of the fear that had once gripped her in his presence. "I am no demon, Reverend Fletcher, nor am I a witch, as you understood the term. I am something far older, a guardian of the balance between worlds." Magistrate Holloway drew a pistol from his coat, his hand shaking. "Whatever you are, you'll not bewitch this town again." Before he could fire, Eleonora raised her hand, and the weapon turned to dust in his grasp. Murmurs of terror rippled through the crowd. "I have not come to harm any of you," she announced, her voice carrying with unnatural clarity. "But neither will I allow you to harm others as you sought to harm me. The time of blind fear and persecution is ending. A new age dawns, one where the barriers between worlds grow thin once more." She turned, gesturing toward the shimmering portal behind her. Through it, the townspeople could glimpse the boundary stone and the figures gathered around it, Lucian and Ravenna, Lilith and Thorn, creatures from legend made manifest before their disbelieving eyes. "Some of you will fear this change," Eleonora continued. "Others will embrace it, but all must learn to live with the knowledge that your world is one of three, bound together in a delicate balance that I am now sworn to protect." Her gaze found Meredith in the crowd, the young woman's eyes wide with wonder rather than fear. "Meredith Blackwood," she called, "I offer you a place at my side as representative of the mortal realm. The choice is yours, freely given and freely made." Meredith stepped forward without hesitation, ignoring her father's attempt to hold her back. "I accept," she said clearly, her voice steady, despite the gasps of those around her. Reverend Fletcher moved to intercept her, his face purple with rage. "This is blasphemy, heresy, I forbid it." Eleonora fixed him with her amber gaze. "You have no authority here, Reverend. Not anymore. The age of burning women for their knowledge is over." With a gesture, she created a barrier of shimmering light between the Reverend and Meredith, allowing the young woman to reach her side unhindered. Together, they stepped back through the portal, leaving the stunned townspeople to grapple with their new reality. As the portal sealed behind them, reducing to a smaller, stable gateway maintained by the power of the boundary stone, Eleonora felt a profound sense of completion. She had come full circle, from accused witch to high priestess, from hunted to hunter, from powerless to the very embodiment of power balanced by responsibility. The temple Ravenna had spoken of awaited, deep in the heart of the forest, where the boundaries between realms were thinnest. There, Eleonora would establish her seat of power with representatives from each world to assist and advise her. There, she would learn to wield her newfound abilities and to navigate the complex politics of three interconnected realms. And there, perhaps, she would finally find the belonging that had eluded her throughout her human life, not in any one world, but in the sacred space between them all, where the blood of her ancestresses sang in her veins and the ancient magic of the universe flowed through her very being. "Are you ready?" Lucian asked, offering his arm with courtly grace. Eleonora took it, feeling the strange new bond between them, neither love nor enmity, but something more complex and potentially more lasting, mutual respect born from conflict resolved. "I am ready," she replied, as Ravenna fell into step beside them, Lilith, Thorn and Meredith following behind. Together they walked deeper into the ancient forest, toward the temple that would become both sanctuary and nexus. Leaving behind the boundary stone with its three stable gateways, monuments to a new covenant between worlds, sustained by willing sacrifice and guarded by a woman who had found her true power not in domination but in balance. The judgment cage of Blackmere was far behind her now, replaced by the infinitely greater responsibility of judging not individuals, but the very flow of power between realms. It was a burden Eleonora Thorn, last of Morgana's line and first of a new order of high priestesses, accepted with open eyes and a steadfast heart, ready to write the next chapter in a story that had begun centuries before her birth and would continue long after her name had passed into legend.